From 12 News, this is Newsmakers.
In Washington, Republicans are riding high, with President Trump rapidly reshaping national policy and House lawmakers this week approving a conservative budget blueprint. But in Rhode Island, the GOP remains far from power, outnumbered roughly 8-1 in the General Assembly. What's the Republican vision for Rhode Island, and what does the party's local leadership think about the Trump administration's first month? We'll ask our guests this week on Newsmakers, Senate Minority Leader Jessica de la Cruz and House Minority Leader Mike Chippendale. Welcome to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White alongside 12 News Politics editor Ted Nesi, and we welcome to the program Senate Minority Leader Jessica de la Cruz and House Minority Leader Mike Chippendale. Leaders, it's good to have you both on the program. We have plenty to ask you about everything happening down in Washington, but I don't want to start there first. I want to start locally here in Rhode Island in the State House. And as you heard in the open there, it's difficult to get Republican priorities through at the General Assembly. There are only, I believe, 10 of you in the House, right, and 4 Republicans in the Senate. If you could choose one thing, and Leader de la Cruz, I'll start with you. If you could choose one thing, a free pass, right, to get anything through, what would it be?
Oh, unequivocally, the Office of Inspector General. Absolutely. What we're seeing nationally is our president is trying to root out waste, fraud, and abuse. And we've been
But he's also getting rid of inspectors general, isn't he?
But how many does he have?
Yeah.
He has plenty. He has more than one.
More than Rhode Island.
We just want one.
Okay.
You know, we're not looking for 12 or 15 or 50, whatever. We're just looking for one Office of Inspector General. And we know that there is waste, there is fraud, there is abuse at all levels of government. And so if we could get that passed, and the thing about that legislation is over 70% of Rhode Islanders want it. So it's not a partisan issue. Democrats, Republicans alike want it, need it. They know that we need it. So I think it's a common sense legislation. And it's needed, yeah.
Using your free pass on that as well,
It's the
Leader?
same exact thing, absolutely. You know, when we look at a state like Delaware, which is a larger state than us, but has roughly the same population, they have no sales tax. Their annual budget is around $700 million. Ours is $14 billion. That begs the question, where's our money going? Especially when our bridges are collapsing, our roads have potholes, our economy is in the tank, our healthcare is dying, education is in the gutter. Where is the money going? So yeah, we need to find that out first, and the only way to do it is forensically.
You two have been up there for a while now, though, and we get the same statement every time you all introduce this from the leadership saying, well, that would cost money and just be more expensive than the Democrats. And I'm not naive. They just don't want, since they run the state, this to be looked at too closely by someone who's independent. But do you see any signs of change? I did think at one point, would the Washington Bridge give you all a new way to argue for this that might get more traction? But I still don't see any sign that the leadership, the Democratic leadership in either chamber, really feels a pressure to act on this.
Yeah, I don't see that there is any pressure on them by their membership. But I also think that is there really anybody who wants to be held accountable? I don't know that they would necessarily voluntarily put themselves in that position, but I think because we are public servants, I think that is necessary, and we do need a government watchdog.
In the House, any signs of change on that?
None yet. I mean, we did see some language in the governor's proposed budget that looked almost similar to an inspector general. It was more in the auditor general and not so much of a criminal investigatory element to it. But there should be an appetite. It's difficult for a king to give up their crown, right? They're not just going to hand it over. But I think if the pressure becomes too much, and frankly, the pressure is on all of the leadership in the state. Again, the failures I listed are weighing heavily on all of the Democratic leaders. When they have such a lopsided control, it can only be falling at their feet, and they are feeling that pressure from the people of our state.
Go ahead, Ted.
Okay, Leader Chippendale, I want to stick with you because you talked about the size of the round budget. That, of course, comes up a lot. But we also, I've heard a lot of people, frankly, on both sides of the aisle, talk about the need to reinvest in the healthcare system in Rhode Island. We just did a story on people not being able to find primary care. The hospitals say they're struggling, et cetera. So much of the budget's already in healthcare, particularly in Medicaid. How do you square that circle where people are saying we should have a smaller budget, but we might need to put more money into healthcare for the system to be in better shape?
Yeah, we definitely do need to invest more in healthcare. There's no question about that. We're losing our practitioners and our patients, frankly, to Mass and Connecticut. They pay more, it's a healthier system, and it's easier to work there. But we have a more fundamental issue that's hurting us as well in healthcare, is if you enter that field, whether you're a nurse, a CNA, or a physician, you cannot afford to buy a house in the state of Rhode Island. The economy, the taxes, none of it is attractive to someone. So someone leaving medical school or nursing school who has debt is going to have a difficult time spending $3,000 a month on an apartment or buying a house which is now $500,000 median price in Rhode Island, and that is hurting us tremendously as well. You can be in Massachusetts in 20 minutes or Connecticut from 20 minutes, just about anywhere in Rhode Island. Why wouldn't you if you have a certification to go earn 20% more in one of our neighboring states? That's what we're seeing. We have a holistic problem that we have to address as well.
It's interesting you go to housing, because Speaker Shekarchi just yesterday put out another round of bills on that, and that's also always an interesting issue because there's a version of it that's about government red tape, a common Republican complaint about zoning regulations and all that, but then there's a part that's about local control and letting neighborhoods decide what can be built, and we know a lot of neighborhoods, we don't see much appetite for change. I mean, you represent North Smithfield. I think, do you have part of Burrillville too?
All of Burrillville, all of Gloucester.
All of Gloucester, okay. You know, we've seen some frustration in some rural areas that feel like they're being told to build a lot more where they want to keep that rural character. How do you think about that balance to Chippendale?
Yeah. Well, I do think that local control is important because what works in Providence doesn't necessarily work in Gloucester, or Burrillville, or North Smithfield. But I will point out that North Smithfield and Burrillville did meet their 10% affordable housing. With Gloucester, it's a little bit different because
very few cities and towns have.
Very few.
Yeah.
Very few. And when it comes to Gloucester, they don't have sewer and they don't have water. So you need septic and you need a well. And then there's also a lot of wetlands in areas in which you can't build. So I've talked to the folks in Gloucester, and they're not opposed to having affordable housing, but it needs to be done right. It needs to be in the right place. And so local control is important, but also the red tape is an issue. You know, if a builder, wants to build, it takes, oh my gosh, sometimes years. So how can we streamline the process so that building is easier? And I'm not saying, that it's easier and so that the houses aren't well built, but just how can we streamline the process?
Leader Chippendale, one of the criticisms of what the Trump administration is doing right now is that he's treading on the power of Congress to appropriate money. And I just, as Ted said, longtime lawmaker in the legislative branch, how would you feel if Governor McKee were to not spend money that you appropriated?
I mean, that happens all the time, or it gets spent in areas where we didn't appropriate it for. That's just a reality of the dynamic between two co-equal branches of government. We appropriate and they will spend it. We can't compel them to hire this many FTEs in this department, even though we allocated money for it. They can spend it on anything they desire. And yeah, it's a change of administration in Washington, and they have different ideas. Their withholding or lack of spending, it's conditional. It's based on these premises. If these things exist, money will not be allocated for that. It's transactional, and that's what the people in this country voted for.
Leader De La Cruz, do you have any balance of power concerns about what's going on there? I mean, you are a lawmaker. Yeah,
well, the way that I view it is President Trump campaigned on this. He said, this is what I'm going to do. And now he's following through with those promises. So I don't think anyone's surprised. I don't think anyone's necessarily upset unless you didn't vote for him. Again, this is what Rhode Islanders who voted for him wanted and Americans wanted.
Yeah, but he's doing it through, largely through, and we'll see as this progresses, through the pen and the executive order and really kind of cutting out Congress. No concerns there as a lawmaker?
I don't know of any president who hasn't used the pen.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Okay. So, I mean, this is not new. This isn't, just unique to President Trump. Presidents in the past have done it. He's doing it. And he's doing it with the permission of...
You would agree at not this scale, though, right? This is pretty...
Well,
unprecedented.
I think that when we're finding out that people on Social Security, some of them are over 300 years old, and we need to make cuts, well, I think if anyone is 300 years old, I would like to know where the fountain of youth is, where, so we can all benefit from it. But in all seriousness, there is a rampant amount of waste, fraud, and abuse. It's happening at the national level and here at the state level. And so if it takes the pen of the president to cut some spending, I'm all for it.
Speaking of presidents, I want to ask you about the Senate president, Dominic Ruggiero. You crossed party lines just last month and voted for him as Senate president. As you know, there's been a lot of talk about whether he's up to the job anymore with his health ailments. He's currently hospitalized, and of course we wish him well after suffering from pneumonia. Do you still feel that Dominic Ruggiero is up to the job of Senate president?
The way that I look at it, Ted, is his issue is not a cognitive in nature. His is his body, and he's suffering with the cancer and then also with pneumonia. And I don't think that that's enough to say that someone can't serve as a senator. Cognitively, he's still there.
As Senate president, just to you know,
even,
being
even as Senate
file.
president, the majority of his colleagues voted for him. And when I do reach out to him, either in person or recently through the phone, he's there. He's able to answer my questions and concerns. So I would say, if it was a cognitive issue, then I would, obviously I would be concerned. But when we're talking about a physical ailment, no.
And just as a follow-up to that, do you feel Senate leadership and the staff around Senate President Ruggiero are being straight with you and other senators about his health challenges?
100%. When I asked him, how is the president doing? I was told he's not doing so great because he was at Fatima with pneumonia, but now he's doing much better. And I've talked to the Senate president myself, and I don't agree with him on policy, on every policy that he passes. But when it comes to his health, I would just say I'm praying for him. I hope he makes a quick recovery, and then he's back to the chamber, and then we'll fight about legislation.
You want him back in health so you can yell at him about policy disagreements. Yeah, okay.
All right, we're going to take a break here on Newsmakers. When we come back, there's a big vote happening this weekend in the state Republican Party. Stay with us. You're watching Newsmakers. Welcome back to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. This is 12 News Politics editor Ted Nesi. Our guest this week, we have Senate Minority Leader Jessica de la Cruz and House Minority Leader Mike Chippendale. Leader Chippendale, this weekend, now we should note we are recording this on a Friday morning. A lot of people watch on a Sunday, so this vote will have already happened. But this weekend, state Republicans will decide who will lead the party at a Central Committee convention in Warwick on Saturday. Do you support extending Joe Powers' chairmanship or his challenger, Jessica Drew Day?
Joe Powers, absolutely, all the way. It's not even a question. His leadership has been fantastic. He has the contacts throughout the country, frankly, and as well as in D.C. that has helped us. It helped us tremendously in the last election. The entire team that he surrounded himself with, Nyoka Powell, Linda Jameson, and Mary Lou Sanborn, are fantastic professionals who will always put the good of the state above petty politics, and that's why I will support them tomorrow, and that's why I urge all of my colleagues who can vote to support them.
Leader de la Cruz, last I heard from this guy, you were on the fence.
So I'm not on the fence at all. I know who I'm voting for, but I'm just not going to put it out there.
How come?
Well, I've never gotten involved in the past. I don't see myself getting involved in the future. Maybe I will, but I'm just going to let the voters decide who will be the next chairperson. But whoever it is, I'm ready to work with them to get Republicans elected.
I have a dumb question.
Yeah.
Is this a public vote or is it a secret ballot?
Secret ballot.
It is a secret ballot. So are you going to hold your cards after Saturday, or are you going to let people know who you voted for, win or lose?
Well, when people from the party call me and ask me who I would support, I would tell them, honestly who I'm supporting. But I'm not going to make a public statement as, again, I do not want to get involved in that aspect. I know who I'm supporting, but whoever it is, whoever wins, I am ready to work with them to get Republicans elected.
Let's talk a little more about politics. I was struck, Leader Chippendale, this week, the AFL-CIO, which often is on the other side of issues from you two, put out a poll they commissioned, and they acknowledged 48% of Rhode Island voters in their poll, which was conducted by Joe Fleming, but they asked the questions, what they should be. 48% of Rhode Island voters said the state's moving in the wrong direction. And I looked back, I have 15 years of Joe Fleming polls with that question in it. Once in those 15 years was right direction ahead of wrong direction in Rhode Island. And yet, as you both know, Republicans have struggled, whether it's to win state or federal office or to measurably expand your numbers in the General Assembly. is it just that in the end there's too many voters turned off by national Republicans and you all just can't get a hearing on the local issues like Inspector General type stuff? I mean, how are you thinking about that now, especially when there was a little updraft for the Republicans last year, but not enough to change things in the Assembly?
Yeah. I think that there is a shift. There is a shift occurring. We've seen in the last two presidential elections, towns, Democratic strongholds like Johnston supporting President Trump in both of those presidential elections. So yes, there is absolutely a shift. We had 6 members come into the House of Representatives this year. 4 of them were Republicans. 2 of them were in districts that have not had Republicans in them for a very long time. 2 of them are in districts that just recently got Republicans, so they're only the second term or second person in that seat. So we are moving to new areas. We look across Rhode Island. 42% of our state voted for President Trump, a very polarizing figure. The Democratic Party is lurching very far to the left, spastically lurching to the left.
Isn't your party lurching to the right?
I don't think if you look at what we're doing in the State House that you could draw that conclusion, but folks often do want to associate us with what they see in Washington, which is not often a very apples to apples comparison. But no, I don't feel we're lurching to the right at all. In fact, I think the election returns demonstrate that our message resonates more with the voters. We had great conversations with people this year, and they were talking about their taxes, their electric bills, all of the things that people are struggling with right now. And if you stick to those grocery items, you're going to be more attractive to voters. We're hopeful that they will break out of the Stockholm Syndrome that they've suffered from for 80 years.
How much is it an incumbent issue where you all just need the longtime Democratic incumbents in some of these, because we have seats now that have voted for President Trump clearly that are still electing Democrats further down the ballot, maybe because the Democrat's been there a long time and knows everybody in the neighborhood. I mean, do you think it's just that you got to get these Democratic incumbents to retire and then the Republicans will get more of a hearing?
Anecdotally, I use my own family as an example. They're union guys, worked in the trades or factories or whatever, and they were talking about how they're going to vote for Trump, and they didn't want Kamala or Biden, whoever. They were going to vote for Trump. And I said, wow, this is really great. There's a shift happening. I said, and who are you going to vote for state Senate? And they said, the same person. And I was like, why? I said, why are you willing to vote for a Republican as president, but down ballot? And they said, well, so-and-so came to a fundraiser, and this one came to the feast. And because it's like retail policy, we're so close to the people. When you make those relationships, it's very hard to not to vote for those individuals over and over again. So I think our best options right now are to first focus on open seats and then identify seats in which Trump did well, and then let those candidates know. You can't just run once. You might have to run twice or even 3 times. I point to Brian Newberry in the House. He ran 3 times. The 3rd time he won. And just to point out my district, a Democrat held it for 20 years. And I'm in that seat.
Is your seat the old Fogarty seat?
It is.
Yeah. So that's a stronghold for Democrats for a long time.
It really was.
Seat, yeah.
So is it possible? Yes. It's going to take time.
Leader Chippendale, Rhode Island has a large percentage of citizens on Medicaid. That's health coverage for low-income people, including some of your constituents. The budget resolution passed by the House in Washington earlier this week could force deep cuts in that program. Are you worried about that?
Of course, there's always a worry when you have people who are relying on services. But there's also a danger when you have approximately 34% of your state is Medicaid eligible and so reliant on that.
So would the state have to pick up the burden if this resolution went through?
I think it would all depend. I think if we see cuts in Medicaid, we need to take action in the state to be a little bit more proactive. For example, we have what's called a benefits cliff or a welfare trap, where if you find yourself on assistance, you need a hand up. If you make one step forward, you're penalized, and it's easier for people just to stay in the system. We need to help people get back on their feet completely, not just give them a lifeline for the time being and trap them in that cycle. That's where we have to focus to get those savings. We shouldn't have 34% of our state relying on those
But that
services.
would take a long time to ramp up.
Yes, it would.
Wouldn't it blow a hole in Rhode Island's budget?
It certainly could, yeah. We rely on so much federal money in the state of Rhode Island, and Medicaid is one of the areas where we rely heavily.
Yeah.
We do very poorly on our state Medicaid portion, which is what we started this program off with, talking about on the reimbursement rates for our healthcare practitioners. So we have a lot of work to do, and those seem like they're competing interests, because they are. we have to make our state healthier. We have to make it economically healthier, and the people have to be less reliant on those systems.
Simple question for each of you. Stick with you first, Leader Chippendale. Have you had any conversations about taking a job in the Trump administration?
Yes.
You know what? Appreciate your candor. Will you say more, or is it not worth pushing you on it?
It's not worth pushing me on it. You know, if an opportunity where I think I could make a lasting difference were to present itself, I'm open to that.
He set the precedent for candor, Leader De La Cruz. Have you had any conversations like that?
I have been approached, and but again, I've said before, and I'm going to say it again. It would have to be something where it would make sense for me to leave, because I love what I do and I feel that I have been effective in the Senate, even in the superminority. But you know, never say never, I guess. Even when people ask me, like, oh, you can run for something else, I never thought I would be a senator. I never thought I would run for office, and here I am. So I learned very early on, I shouldn't close the door on anything, be open to the possibility, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to happen.
I literally have like 30 seconds left for this. I'm sorry in advance, but a lot of hand-wringing over Washington Bridge funding with the Trump administration. Are either of you concerned that that funding might evaporate?
No, again, these withholdings are conditional. If we meet the conditions, we'll get the money. If our state doesn't want to meet the conditions, then our state will wallow in its own self-induced problem.
All right, you share that?
I do.
Okay. All right, thank you both, House Minority Leader Mike Chippendale and Senate Minority Leader Jessica De La Cruz. When we come back, Ted foreshadowed it. A series of housing bills were proposed by House Speaker Joe Shekarchi. Stay with us. You're watching Newsmakers. Welcome back to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. For a fifth consecutive year, House Speaker Joe Shekarchi rolled out a package of housing bills. They include expanding electronic permitting to agencies like the DEM, CRMC, and DOT, making it easier to subdivide lots, and a pair of bills that would allow development of unused state or commercial land. In all, Shekarchi unveiled a dozen bills. While not as flashy as proposals in years past, like opening the door to more accessory dwelling units, Shekarchi said he is trying to encourage development, especially at the local level. But there has been resistance to this push for growth from city and town leaders. Ted Nesi sat down with Shekarchi right before the Speaker's news conference on Thursday and asked him about that tension.
Do you get any exhaustion from your caucus, from your reps who say, Speaker, another round of votes on housing? Sometimes maybe my council members get mad about some of it or anything like that?
Yes, I get that all the time, but it's not just limited to housing. I get that for a lot of issues, but I will tell you that my housing package, I have 20 reps who want to sponsor 8 bills. So there's a lot of people who want the housing legislation. Housing polls very high. If you do any polling in the state, I know you're a big student of polling, housing and healthcare and housing, 1 and 2 issues, depending on how you poll, significant. The single largest housing bond in the history of Rhode Island, $120 million last year, passed by over 70% of the vote, or close to 70% of the vote. Very strong numbers. It is a need people want to address, and representatives that I deal with every day want to be part of the solution.
That is all the time that we have on the program. I want to thank you for watching. If you missed the first half of the program, we had the GOP perspective from the Rhode Island State House with the Senate and House leaders. I'm Tim White. We'll see you next week on Newsmakers.